Hi Year 11, this video is feedback from the October assessment. We're going to look at each question in turn and some waggles that have emerged from the assessment itself. So all of the answers you will see are your own work. A reminder that you did the Socrative, which was marked out of 16, and that will contribute towards your final result. And then 3 exam style questions. The 4-mark question should take 5 minutes and be 1 paragraph long. The 8-mark question, 2 paragraphs in 10 minutes. And finally, question 3, 12 marks, 3 paragraphs, 15 minutes. Now, if you are entitled to 25% extra time, those timings will change ever so slightly. So let's focus first of all on question 1. Describe 2 problems faced by African Americans during the 1950s and 60s. So well done to Sienna, who was one of a few people in the class who managed to get 4 marks out of 4. And actually what Sienna's written about is quite similar to what a lot of you wrote about in your answers. So the 2 issues that Sienna has identified is segregation and discrimination. And the one thing that I was pleased to see in this answer is that Sienna has identified that segregation was only taking place in the southern states. So there's a mention of the Jim Crow laws and explains the segregation of people based on race in public spaces such as parks, buses and schools. But mentioning identifying that segregation is something that is happening in the southern states was very important. And then the second part of the answer, discrimination in areas such as employment and education. In the South, white teachers earn 30% more than black teachers. And that provision there of a precise example is really important. So well done, Sienna. 4 marks out of 4. Question number 2. In what ways were the lives of women affected by the campaign for more equality in the USA during the 1960s and early 1970s? Explain your answer. And I believe this is Karishma's answer. I'm guessing going off the handwriting here. Karishma, I'm pretty confident it's you. Well done. You got 8 marks out of 8 here. So what we need in this question is 2 developed paragraphs. And again, what's being mentioned isn't overly different to what I saw in a lot of answers that didn't get full marks. So the first paragraph is related to equal pay. And so it says there that women petitioned and threatened legal action and went on strike. So what's good, after identifying the issue of equal pay, it then says what the women's campaign was doing in order to try and get equal pay. And then we get the evidence, the example that we really need here, which is the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which stated that 2 people doing the same job should be paid the same regardless of their sex. What's good after that? So we've identified the point, we've provided a clear example, and what follows on from that? This led to more women feeling encouraged to get a job. Since they had a better income, more women could leave abusive husbands. The economy improved as unemployment fell. And so what Karishma's doing here is explaining the impact of that change, because remember that the question asks you about how the lives of women were affected. So it's not just about talking about the law changing, but it's what actually changed for women in their day-to-day lives. So secondly, we've got changes to people's private lives and their personal lives. So we've got, first of all, the Supreme Court's ruling on contraception, which said that unmarried couples should have legal access to contraception. So again, we've got the point and then the example of the Supreme Court case, but then this meant that. And that is straight away after the example, some explanation here. Women felt less pressure to get married and have a man have control over them. And then it goes on to provide another example of women having control over their own bodies and their own lives with the legalisation of abortion in 1973 in another Supreme Court case, which Karishma's correctly identified as Roe versus Wade. And then there's some good knowledge there. Abortion was a fundamental right for all women under the US Constitution, but with limitations after the first trimester. So an abortion was only a constitutional right for a pregnant woman in the first trimester of pregnancy. And then finally it says this overturned laws that individual states had passed, which had banned abortion or severely limited its use. I think one way that I would have changed this ever so slightly is my point at the beginning would have been women had more control over their bodies. Bodily autonomy is the phrase that I would use here. Women had autonomy over their bodies. And when we give the example of contraception and abortion, and then we can link to that explanation, women feeling less pressure, women feeling that they can pursue a home life and a career, or choose to prioritise one or the other of those things at a certain time in their lives, giving women more control over their lives. Okay, quite a few of us got 12 out of 12 on the 12-mark question, which is fantastic, because that's the one worth the most marks in an exam situation, and it was really good to see some strong answers. The one that I've chosen here is Lydia's. Well done to Lydia, and well done to everybody that achieved a level 4 mark in this question. I think what I saw a lot of in this answer in particular, but right across the class, is judgment right from the start. Okay, so in the very first sentence, Lydia's made it absolutely clear that civil rights was more important. So the examples that are provided is the March on Washington in 1963, which led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act the year later in 1964. And what I really like, just like with Karishma's answer previously, this shows, when somebody uses phrases like this shows or this highlights, this means that, what that shows to me is that that person's beginning to analyse, they're explaining the meaning behind the evidence provided, the power and determination behind the protests, and how the publicity raised was able to make changes to America for the better. It's an explanation of the evidence, which is excellent. But it doesn't stop there. It talks about the Civil Rights Act and the impact of that black mayors were elected in areas of America, and showed the impact that was having. Okay, the second paragraph, again, sustained judgment. The actions of Kennedy and Johnson weren't as impactful. It says even though they weren't as impactful, they still led to a change. And that's good, because it's sustaining that judgment. It's reminding the marker, who in this case is me, but in the summer it's going to be, a teacher somewhere in the country, looking at your work for the first time, and you've got to make it absolutely clear all the way through this answer that you've come to a clear judgment. And that's what's done here. But there is mention straight away of Kennedy and the New Frontier and the creation of the Peace Corps. However, there were some failures because Kennedy's Medicare campaign was rejected. This demonstrates that there was only some changes. What I really like about this is, here's the impact, here's why it's not as important as civil rights, and that mention of a limitation is justifying your judgment. It's explaining why you've arrived at that conclusion. And what's really good to see in this answer is that there is an example for Kennedy and for Johnson, because it does ask about both of them, and you will not be able to access a level 4 mark if you do not provide an example for both of those presidents. So it says then Johnson introduced his campaign, the Great Society. There's a mention there about minimum wage, the passage of the Civil Rights Act, but then again there's a limitation. Talking about riots in Johnson's time in office, and it says that he did have a positive effect. Some caused the people of America to be unhappy with the changes. So there is an element there of the limitations of Johnson and Kennedy. And then finally we get to the conclusion. And we see the beginning of it here at the bottom of the second page. And again, it reaffirms what's been said all the way through. I believe that the civil rights campaigns brought more change. That judgment is absolutely clear all the way through this answer. But it's important that we look at the whole conclusion, because just telling me your opinion at the end isn't enough. It's a great start, but it needs to be explained. So it says that the civil rights movement had the publicity that they were able to bring to their issues. This publicity is the reason why people such as Kennedy and Johnson saw that change needed to be made. If I was being really picky, I wouldn't want the word people there. I'd want the word politicians, national politicians, or just the word presidents, Kennedy and Johnson. I really like the argument made here that Kennedy and Johnson were responsible for the law changing. They were responsible for introducing the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, but they did so as a result of the pressure that was put onto them by the civil rights campaign and the attention that it had. I think that's a really strong argument to make. And then it finishes off with saying both factors led to changes being made. If it wasn't for the protests, those changes wouldn't have happened to society. A really strong answer. And it wasn't the only one I saw of that level, that standard, that top level 4 standard, which is a really, really promising sign at this stage in year 11.